All right, so today we're going to cover online product presentation, specifically your photographs. So for this segment, we're going to cover the ups and downs of taking your images, etc. But spoiler alert, if you have a smartphone, you probably can get started right now. But enough of that. Let's cover some of the common items that you see, but they're not necessarily required, but they're very common for people taking photos of their products. To run through equipment that you might need, naturally a smartphone, or in the old days a camera. For some photo perfectionists, you can still use a camera. It's not necessary though. Seriously, a smartphone gets it done 99.9% of the time. The next thing, you may want a tripod, not required. Again, light source. Make sure you have good lighting. Doesn't have to be anything particular. Natural if you can make it work. Soft lighting, hard lighting to show contrast, etc. Generally, you might need some kind of background, a sweep, sometimes we call it. Again, not required, and we'll show you why here in a little bit. You can have mannequins, stands, etc. also, and then photo editing software. Not recommended though. Most providers already have a filter built in as you're uploading images. And in some cases, you want to keep the image as genuine as possible to establish credibility. Now, bear in mind, if you're just cleaning out your basement and need a good online outlet, don't worry about too much about presentation, etc., branding, or anything like that. But if you're a seller in it for the long term, you're going to want to make sure that your products follow a consistent format, set of images, etc., that clear all the confusion, and also let the buyer know that you're the one selling the item and that you're reputable. For instance, I see a lot of sellers on Poshmark, without even the description, I can tell it's their product just because of how it's laid out. It's just a no-brainer. So that's something to consider as well. So how it embodies your brand. What are the must-haves for every photo? So you'll have to think about what's specific to what you're trying to sell and a good system. Matt behind the camera already broke it down for me, and it totally makes sense. We'll cover more of that later. And then also think about what your image standards are as well. You want a consistent image. You don't want to take some images super blown up, super compressed, etc. You want to find a good image format. The largest image is not necessarily the best image. Also, kind of an unknown fact is most apps, eBay, etc., have a one-to-one button that will change the size of the image that you're taking into a square so it fits perfectly into their sales presentation, if that makes sense. So in other words, you don't have to resize the images manually. You can just hit one-to-one. It'll send it up as a square image. If you're using an iPhone, you're going to want to change the aspect ratio from, I think, 16 something to the square. That will also be directly compatible with eBay, a lot of other platforms too, maybe Poshmark as well. So you can kill a lot of birds with one stone visually with that. All right, now, next up, if you still haven't kind of found a flow for how to photograph your items, etc., there's a couple things to consider, different types of shots. First is the studio shot. The item fills up most of the frame, background is pretty much blank or doesn't compete with the image. You'll see this presentation in a lot of online boutiques, etc. No background in that case, studio shot. Next up is the product image, just the product itself, maybe superimposed against the background. However, do not use a black or dark background. You will actually be penalized on views for this. The selling platforms don't particularly like it. White, gray, or beige is your best bet. Next up is the lifestyle shot. This is whatever your product is in action, in everyday life, in the wild, etc. You'll have to use your imagination to figure out how you want to convey why your product is superior or why it should be purchased. But this is another angle that you can take on that, the lifestyle shot. All right, the next type of shot is the close-up. So naturally, things that you want to show more detail, etc. Zoom in, present a larger image, etc. Now remember, some people think, oh, that's just for to show detail, intricate detail and things. No, you also want to use that to show the blemishes in the items as well. Keep it above board. Let the potential buyer know what they're getting. So yes, close-up shots aren't just to show the intricate beadwork or whatever. They're also to show the blemishes and let the potential buyer make an informed decision to purchase. All right, next up for your product is the group shot. So this is if you're trying to upsell or you're trying to show scale as well. It's good to post the item with other items, but generally you don't want to show other items that aren't for sale in the group shot. It just causes confusion. So avoid that. And the last is the demonstrative shot. So your product in action, why it's great, why it's superior, why they should buy it. Anything that demonstrates that, and you can use your imagination, goes into the demonstrative shot. However, for most reselling stuff, you'll find a formula, stick to it, and just keep tinkering with it until you find what works. All right, next up is lighting. Now, people will say, oh, buy a light box, or buy this, or natural lighting. Again, good light is good light. And like I said, spoiler alert, if you got a smartphone and good lighting and common sense, you should already be taking photos. You probably don't even need to finish the video. But, haha, just kidding. But anyway, with lighting, soft lighting generally smooths things out. Hard lighting will show detail. Make sure you're careful with that. People will say generally don't use flash. And in a lot of cases that's correct. But if you really need to show hard detail, flash might come in handy for that. But ultimately it's up to you and your brand. So be careful with lighting. All right, next thing to consider is angles. So naturally, the potential buyer can't hold your product. They can't hold it in their hands, look at it, etc. You want to supply the images that will take place of that. Think of a good 360 perspective with when you're taking pictures. Make sure there's not too much overlap and redundancy. If there is, then you probably don't need that many pictures. But find your system with the angles, but also play with them too, because a lot of products can really pop from certain angles, etc., and that's supposed to be expected. So play with the angles and be creative. Next up, your background. Some people will say, hey, you need a sweep, or you need an alcove, you need to build an alcove. Not necessarily. Like I said, a lot of this depends on what your brand is. So for most of the time, we're going to recommend just a plain background that doesn't compete with the product. White, beige, gray, something safe. However, there's certain boutiques and things like that that have unique branding. Some people will use a playful background, and maybe that caters to their demographic of shoppers, etc. That totally makes sense. But for the small fish in the big pond, sometimes that can actually throw off potential buyers. If your angle is more of a glamorous motif or something like that, then you may want to play into that as well, where a background would work great for you. But for most bread and butter selling, your standard images and a non-competing background are going to get it done. All right, now, something that a lot of sellers never think about: image file size and image compression. Now, people think, oh, more is better, right? No, actually, no. After the image gets over a certain size, it just takes up more space without giving more resolution per se. So be very careful. You generally, if you're going to create photos, save them on the medium setting. Generally, most cameras will give you an option: small, medium, large, extra large, or uncompressed. Select the medium option. Also be careful with your sizing. And like I mentioned before, there's a 1-to-1 or a square button on most sales apps and the iPhones. I don't know anything about Android, but you probably got it. You probably had it before iPhone did, let's be real. But anyway, the 1-to-1 button is going to be great because it's going to put it in that perfect ratio. How many times have you taken a photo, it was brilliant, upload it, and the toe of the shoe is cut off or something like that? That will prevent that going forward. Also, it'll create lower file sizes, and be cognizant of that. In this case, for image compression, bigger is not necessarily better. It's just more. All right, so for the beginning online product presenter, etc., I have 10 quick tips for you. First, give the items a quick clean, naturally. You want to present it in the best shape you can. Take a look at where your lighting's going to be. Make sure that it's even and it's good lighting. Be wary of using flash, but don't rule it out, okay? Also, make sure your background complements the product and doesn't compete from it. Remove any clutter from the background, especially if the clutter is also not for sale. Have the item fill the frame. Play your angles well. Get up close and personal. Show the highlights and the lowlights equally. And the last one, don't over edit. That's it. All right, one last thing. These are observations that we're making from our market, and they may not necessarily apply to your market. However, we would love to hear your comments, feedback, experiences, etc. Down below. So feel free to join the conversation, create a conversation. Let's learn from one another and our individual markets. Thanks for joining us with Sweet Life Selling. We'll see you soon. Keep selling.